Episode 15, Training the Poochie. It took a lot longer learning the stuff that the intelligence corps needed me to know than anything else. That was tough stuff. The standard they required was crazy. I don't think they were used to teaching someone with such a high IQ as myself, because they made it so difficult to understand that it must have been really simple. Basic training was a lot of fun. I was brought into the camp in Pierbright in the back of a big black van on a sunny Sunday afternoon under the eyes of the whole base. This in no way made it evident to everyone that I was something very different than the average 17-year-olds that were on the course. What were they thinking? Me, a psychotic werewolf, mixing with young, egotistical cadets. It was a silly thing to do, just a plain and simple, stupid action. They gave me my own place to stay, separate from the rest of my unit. It was not a lovely room, but it was a lot better than the cells that had, been in my life for the past month or so. Those poor little bastards had a shared bunk room where they would bond or could bond and become battle brothers. I could not think of anything worse. I often wondered if they got to scrub the loos with their toothbrushes like I'd seen in the films. Forget bonding, that was not the way how it should work for me, I'm afraid. Anyway, I was pretty happy as the me in team. Well, me and Fen, but sadly that does not fit a clever play on the word team, does it? There's no Fen in team. Put it this way, I would be an outsider, and this special treatment would only make me even less likeable to the other recruits. I think the powers that be wanted the guys in the unit to hate me from the start, which they did, which was fun. I was placed in training with the intelligence corps guys as they started their 14 weeks of basics. I was sarcastic, saying that it was fun. It was a bit shit, to be honest. My initial week, called attestation, was an introduction to the discipline to which they expected me to bow. You probably already realise that being told what to do was something that did not sit well with the way I look at life. As a child, I was diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder. I don't think I had an issue. I just did not recognise any authority to defy. In the first hour of training, we had our introduction to our Lord and Master. He was Sergeant Major O'Toole, and oh, what a tool he was. He'd been told that I was a special recruit that needed to be watched and helped out through the process. This did not go down well with him, as he took offence at me getting such special treatment. Anyway, the long and short of the story is that he was a little nasty towards me, he was a little shouty, and then suddenly he was a little bit dead. He was giving me a bollocking in front of the rest of the squad for some forgotten reason. I think I had told him very respectfully to go have sex with himself at some point. I did really well and just stood there while he shouted about an inch away from my face at considerable volume. I could not even make out what he was saying. All I could do was smell his breath and get the odd splash of saliva on my skin from his extreme verbalization. I could actually see into the back of his mouth and watch the uvula there shake as he screamed. As he yelled and bawled, I tried to deal with it. Honestly, I really did. I tried to clear Fenrir from my mind, who at this point was going fucking mental. He was expressing his fury at how the two of us were being treated. I had made a deal with the government to not hurt anyone on purpose during training. Accidents could happen, but I had promised I would allow myself to be treated like the other plebs under their command. The treatment here would lead to an accident of some sort, though. This was unsufferable, and he went on, and 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 then, oops, he was dead. As he continued to yell, I started to get a little restless. My posse was sat behind him looking at me as the soldier man with skin like spam continued berating me. I was doing okay. I was holding back from the want to kill this little man. I'd done very well letting him do his stuff. Then the posse let go of an overemphasized and overdramatic yawn. I couldn't help it. My response to Fen's messing about was to let out a little laugh which silenced the yelling man. You could actually see him knocked off his game by this unforeseen circumstance. Something that may never have happened before just had. He had no way of coping with this. He went into a bodily vibrating silence. I mean, the guy was shaking so fast and so violently that he seemed to levitate from the ground and get at least an inch or two above the tarmac. After a moment of thinking about his response, the little man in khaki went batshit crazy. The blood vessels on his buzz-cut skull stood out like hosepipes, sweat beaded, then ran together on his tiny forehead. I felt as though I was in a spittle storm. I was not anal about my cleanliness. I am a werewolf. There's always some animal hair on my body somewhere, and when you can lick your own balls, I'm afraid that you will, given half a chance. His bodily fluids were flying into my face, eyes, and sometimes mouth, which was a big no for me. I'd really tried not to do anything awful as a response. I gently reached out, gently grabbing his neck, and drew him towards me gently by the throat and started to squeeze gently as I lifted him into the air, gently. As you can tell, I was being particularly gentle. He slowly went quieter and quieter, grabbing with futility at the hand holding his throat and struggling. I slowly brought his face closer to mine, and I looked deep into those piggy eyes as he realised he'd fucked up. It was bliss as his voice faded to gurgles, and finally he slowly stopped wiggling his body and gave up. His head turned a lovely shade of purple, and he was dangling from my hand by the neck. The main thing was that he was not talking anymore, which was bliss. I put my spare cut hand to my ear and spoke to him. "Sorry? What were you saying? I can't hear you anymore. What were you saying?" The rest of the squad were stunned and immobile apart from the awkward shuffle of feet. I continued to crush the tool's throat in front of them. The poor young guys had no idea what to do. I don't know if they thought this might have been part of the training, but eventually I dropped the body on the floor, giving him a quick poke with my foot to see if there was still any life in them. There wonderfully was not. Silence and happiness. "Oh no," I said. "He's dead!" Then I looked around at the rest of the squad. I could see the horror and the confusion in their faces at what had just happened. To be honest, I felt a little embarrassed and just shrugged my shoulders and looked at the floor. After a long silence, I felt a little more confident. I looked to my brothers in arms and smiled at them. None of them could hold my eye contact, even though they were all potential killers, or with the potential to be fucking killed. I was a little disgusted with them all, to be honest. I wanted to think that they would all have wanted to do what I did, but I realised they were already a bunch of cowering sheep, waiting for the next person with authority to come along and tell them how to react to what had just happened. "Little thing's not shouting anymore, is he?" I asked them, raising my hands. I genuinely thought this would lighten the moment. I looked at the boys because they were little boys that had come here to be conditioned and programmed into being good little soldiers for Blighty. I do not know who I was most disgusted with, the Sarge or the kids. I suppose the army had made them both, but it was so quick with the recruits. I poked the cooling body with my toe again. "What were you saying, Sarge? What were you saying?" I said, cupping my ear and bending towards the body, emphasising that I was listening for a reply. No one else found it amusing, so I stopped trying to make them laugh. After a few moments of staring at the cooling corpse, I spat on him, then walked back into my room. I was a little nervous, but very excited to see how, they would handle this turn of events. As you can imagine, the army did not really enjoy my reaction to the O'Toole, especially the killing him bit, but they managed to write it off as an accident during training, and his widow and children got a substantial package from the government. See, there is a happy ending of sorts. I can't imagine anyone missing this guy, and his kids would, do much better without this man in their life. To be honest, I was sure that he would not be missed by most. He was a grade A dick. I never saw the other recruits again, although strangely a week later they mentioned a trainee squad of soldiers on the BBC News had been killed in an awful helicopter crash out of this base. I always wondered if that was them. Not that I cared particularly about the soldiers themselves, but if he'd been killed, to cover me up, then that meant I was super important, and I liked that idea. I did basic training on my own. My new owners thought that probably would be best, and that the raw recruits were probably better off without me in their lives. They were right. I was treated with a new level of respect and followed the orders that I was given. No one shouted at me or tried to belittle me, so it all went very well. I did my basic training and left the little base, just as a rumour. Now I moved on to the special forces training that I had so wanted to attempt. I would have to complete the 6-month course, and that would allow me to be part of not the SAS but the SRR, Special Reconnaissance Regiment, linked to the SAS. I had to read about the selection as a kid. It had intrigued me that it was this ultimate test for only the most vital people to undertake. This was the craziest physical and mental test that any human could take to see if they were tough enough to be the best. I did not have any of the prerequisites for the course, but my handlers did not seem to mind. The trip to Wales consisted of me in the back of a minibus. Again! I was always in the back of a fucking minibus or van for these journeys, separated from normal human beings. I don't know if it was for their safety or to build this idea that I was something different. Again, we were doing hundreds of boring miles on fucking motorways. The 2 soldiers with me were pretty entertaining as I listened to them boast about their late night conquests and the operations that they'd been on and other crap of which men's banter consists. The van itself took on the smell of close-quartered men everywhere with a mixture of body odour and farts. Luckily, I had my music to soothe my mind and my posit for the company, so I never felt lonely or bored. It was always great sitting and talking to the posit. We discussed how we would kill and escape from these guys and what particular modes of torture we would undertake on them. Always a fun discussion, and there were so many things we could do. It never got dull. In the background I had my faves like Kate Bush and the Floyd playing. It was actually not too bad a journey, to be honest. The drivers were supposed to take turns driving and rest, but they just chatted constantly and stayed awake on caffeinated energy drinks and cigarettes. The smoking had been our only bone of contention on the journey, but they soon stopped smoking in the van when I told them that I had no compunction in killing one of them to show the other that I meant it. I don't know who had given them their briefing, but they complied immediately and were silent for some time. I sensed the anxiety and the fear pheromones ooze off them both. They had obviously been told I was not to be taken lightly. Did they actually know what I was? Would these little people be told? I should have asked them, but I wasn't that interested in finding out, to be honest. We travelled up the M4 and crossed the Severn Bridge and made our way to the little base in Senny Bridge, which would be my home for the next few weeks of training. The training was actually it was a pretty pleasant experience for me. I love to be in the mountains, and the Brecons were pretty bleak, but with enjoyable views. Wales is the greenest place ever. It is green with green and then another green in between those greens. There are very few trees and, unsurprisingly for Wales, very few sheep, so I have no idea what the locals did at night in the Brecons. Maybe they're sisters, apparently. We arrived at the little base, and I, as usual, was late to arrive and came under the "Need to Know" banner. I think that the other recruits had been pre-warned about me to some degree, so they wanted very little to do with me. Looking back on it, I think they may have felt that I was part of the selection process somehow. I often caught them looking in my direction, but contact was rare and only for moments. I ate by myself on a separate table from the rest of the guys. They all seemed happy for this to be the case, and it felt right to me too. Posit and I would love sitting and creating an uncomfortable atmosphere that ruined their simple meal times. I would always arrive a little late to a room full of laughing and bantering men that would stop immediately on my arrival. I would always be polite and greet everyone. Proper psychos never show any anger or hurt. Laughter and smiles hide our true intentions. We just save up the malice to take it out on others a little later, if we can be bothered. In my mind, I have a little notebook of folk to hurt in the future. I find the best way to take my petty revenge is at some point in the future when, more often than not, they just don't expect it. I was disappointed, to be honest. These were supposed to be the ultimate men and the superior warriors of the world. They weren't that at all. They were just hill runners who could sit still in the cold for a few days and fire guns. They were really disappointing. I was without a doubt the most superior being there, even just in my human form. I was the best. The food was adequate and contained lots of calories, unspecified meat pie and gravy peas and chips, followed by some pudding in tin custard. I missed raw flesh, but I had made promises on that front. The meals were as if back at school, but I knew that the food would be a test as well as everything else here, so I ate heartily, having my usual 5 or 6 servings. I needed the significant calorie loading of plenty of food. I was a werewolf, so was a metabolic burning marvel. I could sense that those around me were all tough men, very tough men, and there was a mixture of fear and confidence in the room about what would take place over the next few days. The first month was really about walking and navigating in the mountains. We would slowly be pushed into becoming physical specimens through daily training that was always close to pushing the normals, as I called them, to exhaustion. Many of them were struggling with what they were undertaking physically. My lack of stress and my actual enjoyment of the process was annoying them somewhat. None of them could keep pace, and they realised early on in the set of hill walks that I was not a usual candidate. Even compared to these supermen, I was something different. For example, on the initial walk, some of the guys had already decided they would try and compare dick sizes. The sensible guys in the group kept a simple pace that they knew they could maintain for hours. The dick swingers pushed to the front and tried to make it some sort of race. The actual PTs who were leading the party warned them against this, but went with them, knowing that the recruits would regret their decision. I suppose you pathetic beings have to try and promote your self-esteem somehow. The day was savage. The rain horizontal, but the weather kit here was of much better quality than that of the basic grunts, and it kept us much drier and warmer for a lot longer than you would expect. I could feel the others suffer as the temperatures decreased and the cold water finally drove its way through their clothes to their skin. They were miserable, but managing to carry on against the odds. As the initial cheery banter died away and the silence of the hard slog took over, I began to thrive in their weary breakdown. Their misery imbued me with the energy to push. The day was grey and the clouds screened the mountain tops from us. It was treacherous and slippy. The ordinary men, with their lack of my complete dexterity that the more superior of us have, would often fall and struggle like ickle baby deers on ice. It was not long into the trek that one man fell and turned an ankle, a prevalent injury I was led to believe in the selection. I made a joke about the fact we should already get used to just leaving those who could no longer continue. I laughed and added that it would help in the journey if we ate him. I thought my joke was funny, but no one else found it so. I picked up the invalid and laid him across my shoulders on top of my 80+ pound pack to mollify them. The rest of the group looked upon this action in disbelief, but none of them offered in any other way to solve the problem, so I carried him happily until we got to a point some 3 clicks out of our way. There we met a Land Rover that took him back to the camp. These forced walks are not supposed to be the test of fitness. All these men were super fit. It was a mental test of how the strength of your mind could overcome your physical body. All you had to do to succeed was to just keep going. Keep throwing one foot in front of the other. This was no competition for these men, really. The last thing any of them needed right at this moment was someone to push the pace. For normal humans, it's all about dealing with the mental hardship of this situation. For me, it was just a little walk, to be honest. I knew that the pack I wore was a few more pounds heavier than the other packs. They'd loaded it, but this was not a physical test for me. It was a slight mental test due to the monotony of the march and the terrain. The rain didn't bother me. The cold was not a worry to my body. If it had not been for the humour of the posit, I think I would have given up through sheer boredom. He always brightened my life with his antics and jokes. At first I just kept up with the front runners. Then I started to push. Not too much. Just hard enough that it would be a moderate increase in the pace, just enough that they or anyone else would not notice the increase of pressure. I knew that I was under scrutiny. I knew they were watching how I would interact with the group members, to see if I could play well with others, to see if I would maybe feel some empathy for them. So I tried to do only small annoying things so that it was hardly noticeable. They initially tried to keep up as I pushed, but eventually they started to flag and fall. The chief physical trainer's group leader was maintaining time with me, although even he eventually slowed after all the others had dropped back. "Right, mate, you've done it. You don't need to prove any more," he gasped. "These humans are pretty damn pathetic," Will shared my buzzer. "They're not too super, these super army soldiers, are they?" Over the next few days and weeks, I broke all the records set by any man that had made the selection, and I kept myself to myself as few of the others dropped by the wayside. Eventually, this section of the famous selection was over with one last high walk. Of course, I ran because I'm a cock and came in first, halving the record time posted by any other person. As it was, the last night, I think a few of the less wise boys in the group decided they would give me a scene to, as they say in Britain. They waited for me after showering, and 4 of them tried to bully me and then beat me down. I broke and smashed their pathetic human frames. I didn't kill them, as I'd made the promise, but each of them would carry the scars and the memories of that night's stupidity. I didn't even become wolfine. I just put each of the men down quickly and efficiently. I showed them no malice and did not linger to torture them physically, mentally, or emotionally. I just broke them and walked away. Again, I think it had been a test from the bosses to see if I would revert to type. I think I passed the test. The next part of the selection process was in the jungle. I've no idea where we were, but the guys with me now gave me a wide berth and a lot of respect and communicated with me when needed. In the jungle, we learnt the SF tactics, the weapon drills and standard operating procedures of the special forces. I realised I was constantly assessed, which showed that I was a loner. I really enjoyed the jungle time. It was a beautiful place where I could hunt in my wolf form after dark. In doing this, I learned my own system of tactics for my other forms in this environment. I could also supplement my diet with flesh I consumed from the wildlife I took on my hunts. At the end of this period, I was the only one amongst the remaining group who had not lost significant body weight or had contracted some tropical disease or infection. I did not even poop the worms that the rest of them had in their bellies. After that, there were a few months of employment training in specific areas where I would work: surveillance, reconnaissance, counter-terrorism, survival in hostile situations, signals and stuff. The only bit that actually tested me was the parachute training. I really did not enjoy throwing myself out of a perfectly good plane. Wolves were not meant to fly, and when communicating with the chief the night after the particular segment, I told him that it would not happen again. My posit really did not enjoy the free-falling experience that he went through. I also thought that I might be able to survive just simply jumping from a plane at height. However, I was unwilling to test that theory at this or any future point. No parachuting was going to be a fucking rule. The last part of selection was my favourite. It was the survive, evade, resist and extract part of the process. We were dropped into the Brecon Beacons with a minimal kit and told that some top hot professional soldiers would hunt us. As soon as I was dropped off and at a safe distance, I transformed. The hunters became the hunted, and by the end of the next couple of days, many of the professional soldiers regretted their confidence in that particular operational outcome. They did not capture me, and they did not evade me. In fact, several went missing themselves. It was 1-0 to Fen and myself by the end, and I walked back into the camp with a smile on my face, naked and proud of what I'd done. They had not taken me or found me. They would not have beaten a wolf in the mountains, not one 8 feet tall with the tactical mind of a vicious bastard. The last bit of training was resistance training. No, not weights, you dickhead. This was a test for our ability to resist interrogation. We will not go into the details of what they tried to do. Mostly it was putting me in uncomfortable positions and making me stand still with white noise and shouting. It was so funny as it had little effect on me. They even tried violence. I knelt with a bag on my head and my hands tied behind my lower back. Suddenly I was struck on the back of the skull with something heavy and solid. It knocked me forward onto my face, and unseen by my attackers, my face opened into a genuine smile. I felt them start to kick me and beat me, shouting and swearing. They were deriving pleasure from the violence they could commit on me, and also from ridding themselves of all that pent-up frustration, the frustration that every man builds in their respective lives. As they kicked and punched at my body and head, I allowed myself to fail and fall to the floor. I, for no other reason, started laughing, and they kicked harder for the next second or two. Then I transformed. The next 10 minutes were very sweet. I did not put these 4 men through challenging postures. I tore them apart and greeted the squad of armed men in human form a few minutes later with bloody face and hands. I think I can resist interrogation. Okay, boys? I then introduced them to the parts of the 4 men that were spread around the room. I slept sound and untouched that night in my room. No one had bothered me as I wandered through the camp to the showers. People had disappeared and got out of the way nicely for me as I passed between the buildings. I smiled to myself and enjoyed my last night. Finally, I could reveal myself, so I turned into my werewolf form, knowing the eyes that saw me would never forget. The following day, the chief was waiting outside my door. He'd been flown in by helicopter to remove me from the camp. "What, no breakfast?" I asked. He pulled on the peak of his green camo cap and looked down. "No, Wil, not after last night's supper." "They had it coming, Chief," I replied. "No, they didn't. You're a fucking bully," he replied, sighing and looking at the sky. "Only bullying the bullies, boss," I smiled. I did not get up like a passing out parade or even a pretty certificate or anything. I got an uncomfortable helicopter ride out of there with a very, very, very grumpy chief accompanying me. Well, that was my training complete. If you'd like to buy me a coffee, you can do so by following the link in the description below. There should also be a link to my book. If it's not there, it's on Amazon. You can find it if you really want to. If you don't, then that's okay. And last but not least, love you and hopefully catch up with you soon. Bye.